Welcome to an introductory video about sketching on planes in Solidworks. This is going to be very introductory and basic. As we get further into the course, you'll learn how to sketch not just on planes, but on faces of other features that have already been created. So let's go ahead and create a new part. So I will click on New, go back to Novice, and say Part. And you're familiar with the interface. Just to review, this big area here is the graphics space. Over here we have our feature manager or property manager, depending on what state we're in. Up here we have our command manager and then our menus. So today we're going to start practicing sketching. So I'm going to click on the Sketch tab within the command manager, and you'll see that brings up all kinds of sketch tools. But before I actually start using those tools, I have to decide where am I going to be sketching. Right now, if we look at our graphics space, you'll see it's just a big blank canvas. And if you look down in the corner here, you'll see there are three arrows representing the various axes, X, Y, and Z. And if I click down on the scroll wheel on my mouse and rotate, you can see I'm rotating in 3D space, but there's nothing visually there to tell me that. So how can I figure out where I am in 3D space? What is my reference point? And that is the most easy way to orient yourself are using these three default planes that SolidWorks creates. So there's a front plane, a top plane, and a right plane. And at the intersection of all three of those planes, so if I select all those planes so that they show up, and top plane, where they intersect is the origin. So you'll see it's that dot right there is the origin. And so to begin a sketch, I can choose any one of those planes to sketch on. And you know, really it doesn't matter too much what you start on, but for best practices, I do encourage you to, before you decide where to sketch, think about the actual part you're creating. Are you going to be creating a part that most of the detail on is going to be on the front of the part? In that case, you'll probably want to start your sketch on the front plane. Or is it something that most of the variety in the shape is on the top if you're looking down from the top? In that case, start your sketch on the top. So typically, most of the time, I will start on the front plane, be where I'll start my sketch. So there's a couple different ways I can start that sketch. I can, over here in the feature tree, I can click on front plane and then click sketch. That's one way to do it. And you can see as soon as I did that, it automatically created or switched my view to be normal to, or another way for saying normal is perpendicular to, the plane that I'm sketching on. Because let me just, for example, draw a circle on here. That circle looks perfectly circular right here where I'm looking at it in a front view. Whereas if I rotate using my scroll wheel, you can see it starts looking like an ellipse because now I'm looking at it kind of at an angle, or as I keep going through, if I look at it from the side, it looks like a line, right? So in general, we always want to be sketching normal to the plane we're sketching on. And so it automatically took that view to normal. So that's one way I could have created that sketch. I'm going to cancel out of that sketch and discard my changes. Another way, so I did it by right-clicking or clicking here and then going up to sketch. You'll see that when I clicked on the front plane, it actually brought up a context-sensitive bar here, giving me some options. We've already talked about the normal to option, but it also gave me an option to create a sketch. So let's look at how I did that again. By just clicking on the plane, it automatically said, oh, do you want to create a sketch there? I can click on it, and that's another way to create a sketch. I'll get out of that and show you the last way we're going to talk about creating a sketch. I could also just have created a sketch by starting, click on sketch, and then it asks me, hey, what plane do you want to start it on? And I could pick the front plane, the right plane, the top plane. So I'll click on the front plane here. So that's three different ways, all of which to create a sketch on, on a plane. Okay, so now I'm in a sketch. Reviewing from last time, how can I tell that I'm in a sketch? Couple different ways. One of which is I now see an origin for my sketch, these two red arrows here. Another way I can tell is that up here, instead of saying sketch, it now says exit sketch. And then that other option, reason why, would be I have these the red X to exit my sketch without saving changes, or the blue sketch symbol with the blue arrow saying exit sketch, saving the changes. So those are all three different ways to get into a sketch. Again, pick your plane based on where you think you're going to be drawing your sketch perspective from. While we're in our sketch on the front plane, you can see that all of our sketch tools are active now, or almost all of them. There we have a line, circle, rectangle, and as I talked about in previous examples, under each of those there can be different versions. So either a line, a center line, a midpoint line. So let's just look at the difference in one of those. So if we click the line tool, you'll see it creates a line. My first click shows me the start point, and my second click will end it. Before I do that, you'll also see that as I rotate around, it automatically snaps, if you want to say, to horizontal. And when that happens, you can see the little yellow rectangle with a line through it, showing that that's snapping to a horizontal. If I come down here, the same thing will happen at vertical. So I'm going to create a horizontal line. That's our standard line tool. First click is one end, second click is the other end. And you can see when I click that, it just continued on with the same tool. So if I want to create a box, I can keep doing that. And you can see it's making some inferences. We'll talk more about relations later on. As I'm dragging around, it's trying to make some guesses about what I might want. So you can see there it's snapping to perpendicular to the last line I drew. As I come across, you can see that dashed line is showing up, that it's looking around and saying, oh, as you come across here, I'm seeing that there's a midpoint of a line below. So that's what that symbol right there, the little square with the line through it, saying, oh, did you only want to go as far as the midpoint? If so, you can stop here. Or if I keep going, it'll catch the origin. And I'm going to put this next one at an angle here just to show you that now it's a little harder to see there. It's still giving me those perpendicular to the previous line options, either collinear or perpendicular to it, even though the line itself was at an angle from our X and Y coordinates. So just really useful tools. So I can continue down, let's say, I accidentally switched to an arc there. So I can come from this line perpendicular from the last one, and as I come down along the length of it, once I get to in line with this other line, you can see it picks up infers some geometry, and I can continue on and close my shape. You'll see as soon as the shape closed, as soon as it became a continuous perimeter, the inside was shaded, and that's a clue that you could now use that shape for an extrusion later on. Okay, so that's just kind of an intro to the line tool. I'm just going to select all those and delete them. But under that same group, we also had midpoint line, and let's see how it behaves differently. So if I click on the origin and start moving, you can see it's moving out in both directions. So instead of first click being one end of the line segment, now it's the midpoint of the line segment. So if you're creating something that you know you want to be symmetrical about the origin, that might be a good tool to use. And then you can see as I continue on from there, it's now inferring just standard line segments. Okay, that's kind of an intro to a couple of the line tools. And I would encourage you today to go through a bunch of these tools and just practice seeing what they mean, how they work, how they function. Let's go ahead and put a circle out here. So I've created a circle there, and you can see it immediately became shaded in because a circle is a closed shape. So I could go right from here and extrude it into a three-dimensional body if I wanted to. You can also see that my cursor still shows the circle tool activated. So, and it also shows it's still shaded up here. So I can just keep drawing circles if I wanted to, and I will stay in that tool until I hit the escape key. So I'll delete all of them except one off here to the side instead of at the origin. Because what I want to show here is that I've created this circle, but when you look at it, it's blue all around the outside edges, right? And the center of it is blue as well. And what that means is that this sketch is underdefined. And there's a couple ways I can tell that. One of which is actually, there's multiple ways. One of which is, like I said, there's blue on either the vertices and the perimeter of it. That's one way. Looking down here in the bottom bar, I can also see it says underdefined. Another way you can tell it is if I get out of this sketch, you'll see over here in the feature manager, there's a little minus symbol, and that also tells me that the sketch is underdefined. So let's go back into that sketch, and I can do that by clicking on it, and then on the context toolbar that pops up, click Edit Sketch. So now I'm back in the sketch, and I want to fully define it, because anytime we're going to move on and use a sketch to create three-dimensional geometry or base another sketch off it, we want to make sure that our sketch is fully defined. So right now I can grab, wait for it to catch up. I can drag the outer perimeter, and that changes the size of my circle. You can see that. And also over here, it is showing me the size of it. It's showing me where it's located, X and Y. So I can move it. Instead of being -3 inches off of my origin here, I could put 3 inches, and you can see it flip to the other side. So if I want to say that I want it in line with the origin up and down, but 3 inches off to the right, I can do that using these parameters over here. And if I could say I want the radius of it to be 2 inches. I can put that in there, and it changes it. You'll see doing that, when I did that, the feature manager turned to the property manager. We went over that briefly before. This is just another example that when you are editing something, instead of being the feature, as soon as I click on an actual entity, it becomes the property manager. And this shows all the different properties of this circle. So you'll see I changed the size, I changed the location. It's still underdefined because I only changed them. I didn't fix them or dimension them. So if we want to fully define it, we need to give the sketch more information. And we do that by adding dimensions to it. So you can see up here in our sketch, we have a smart dimension bar. Smart dimension, it makes a guess about what type of dimension you want. If you want to force it into a particular type of dimension, you can click on, there's all different kinds of dimension. We'll talk about more later. But for now, we pretty much always use smart dimension. So I'm going to click on smart dimension and click on the circle. And it's saying 4 inches, and I'll change it to 3.5 inches for the diameter. And it got a little smaller. And you can see now that it's still blue on the outside, because while I have fixed the diameter, you can see I can't drag it anymore. I can still grab the center of the circle and move the circle around. So I'm going to take advantage of something called sketch relations, and I am going to make the center of my circle coincident with the origin. And there's a couple different ways to do that. You can see here we call them relations, and there are no relations for this circle right now. If I drag this circle over, you can see there all of a sudden that little yellow box showed up again right near my cursor, and it's making what we call coincident. The center of the circle is now jumping to be coincident with the origin. And as soon as I did that, now I have fixed the center of the circle and given it a diameter. The circle is now fully defined, and you can see that the perimeter is black, the center vertex is black. Now down here it says fully defined, and if I leave the sketch, you'll see there's no longer that minus symbol in front of the sketch. So that's a fully defined sketch. So just as a reminder, I'm looking at it from the front right now, and I can tell that by on my view manager. You can see this front box right up here is grayed in. I could look at it from the back. It'll look identical because it's a two-dimensional shape with no depth to it right now. I can look at it from the side. It'll look like a line, or from the top it will look like a line too, right? Because it's in 2 dimensions. I can look at it isometrically, and it snaps to a, slightly above and slightly to the right view. Couple different standard views in here. Okay, so I want to be looking at the front. I have my fully defined sketch. I can now use this sketch to do 3-dimensional geometry, and that's going to be turning it into a feature. Once we have our sketch fully defined, we want to turn it into a 3D shape. So how do we do that? That's going to be creating features. So up here we've been using our sketch tab to create our circle geometry in 2 dimensions. I can, from within that sketch, I'll open that sketch back up. So I could change this. Let's say instead of 3.5 inches. I want it to be 2.5 inches, make it a little narrower. Right here, while I'm still in the sketch, I can switch over to the Features tab, and you'll see it allows me to do Extruded Boss is an option. So if I click on that, it'll bring up a Property Manager window over here in the feature tree. Again, we've activated a tool, so it's no longer the Feature Manager. You can still see the Feature Manager. Now I'm looking at the Property Manager for the extrude that I'm proposing to do right now. So what is an extrude? An extrude is where you take a two-dimensional shape and pull it into 3 dimensions. An easy way to visualize it is you think back to as a kid, if you had one of those Play-Doh spaghetti press type things where you had different die shapes, basically different two-dimensional shapes that you squeezed Play-Doh through, and it created a 3-dimensional object by pulling that shape. And so that's what an extrude does. It pulls a two-dimensional shape along an axis to make a 3-dimensional object. So you can see here the yellow perimeter is what it's proposing would be, and that's an 1/8 inch deep. I can, by changing the depth of how long or how far I want it to extrude out, I can change what the dimension of the cylinder that I'll be making here. I can also switch which direction the cylinder is going off of my sketch. So to look at that, here I am. If I look at it from the front, I don't really see it because it's moving towards me. Let's look at it from the side. So I switch my view to be a side view. You can see now, again, it's a little less clear what's going on. Here's my sketch plane back here, the black one. I can see that that's this front plane, right? When I hover over that, it becomes orange. So I'm extruding, let's say I want to extrude 1 inch, and right now I'm extruding to the right. If I click on the direction button, you'll see it extrudes to the left. So I can change the direction, I can change the depth. This is draft, we don't really cover that in this class, but that adds a slight taper to the part, which is useful if you're creating parts that are going to be created via a mold. I can, instead of just extruding based on the depth, that's what a blind extrusion is, I could extrude up to another surface, up to a body, mid-plane, etc. We'll talk more about those options later on. For now, we'll just do blind extrusion, which means we're just extruding a fixed depth. As I talked about before, I could extrude in 2 directions. I can go 1 inch to the left, and I could go 0.25 inches to the right if I wanted to. And you can see the preview updates here as I change the values. So I keep increasing that to where I'm extruding 1 inch in both directions. But I'm just going to stick with one direction, and I'm going to look at it in 3D so I can see what's going on there. Okay, so if I now have 2 options to complete this extrusion, I can either click on the green arrow right here, I can right click and say OK, or I can click up here on this green arrow. And when I do that, I have now created my first 3-dimensional object, a cylinder, based on the perimeter shape of it is based on this sketch. So if I select that sketch and click on show, that'll leave the sketch. So it's kind of hard to see, but it's a gray line on the back here. You can see it when you look through the part. I'm just going to hide the sketch again. That sketch, though, is what's defining this feature. So again, if I want to edit it, I can do that just by selecting it. Comes up with a context-sensitive toolbar that says Edit Feature, or I can right-click on the extrude and say Edit Feature. And that takes me back to the Property Manager with information about that extrusion. One tool that can be really handy when you're working in a feature is up here. If I'm on the Feature toolbar, you can see most things are grayed out because right now I'm in the properties of a specific feature, an extrusion. But you can see there's this Instant 3D. That may or may not be selected on yours. But if I click on it, you'll see the view changed a little bit, and now what can happen is I can grab the edge of this and I can drag it in real time, and you can see it was creating a ruler as I did that about which direction it was going. And if I want to come out a little further, so that's 2 9/16, 2 11/16. Say I want to go out to 3 inches, so I'll just drag it until it says 3 inches and then right click to say OK. So just know that's another option to you. I typically actually don't use Instant 3D because I typically want to say exactly what dimension I want it to be. But as you're starting out and practicing playing with it, that can be a fun tool to play with, because what's really flexible about it is you can see I'm not even in the feature right now. And I can still just grab and edit that without opening and editing the feature definition. So let's look at that again just to clarify what happened there. If I go and look at the feature definition right now, it'll say the depth is 1 1/4 inches. So I'll just say that's great. I have now left the feature. I'm just out. I could create a new sketch on here. I could do lots of different things. But if I select that shape, you can see this orange arrow here lets me just pull that. So we were at 1 1/4 inches. And let's go out to like 3 inches or something. So now I'm at 3 inches, hit enter, say OK. And if I go back in there now and look at that dimension, you'll see it's 3 inches, even though I didn't actually type in 3 inches and I didn't open up the feature properties. So if that's useful to you, if you develop a workflow that you like using Instant 3D, know that that's there. And you can see it's there, that orange arrow shows up. I can also move things based on these orange arrows. And if I turn Instant 3D off, now when I select those shapes, none of that happens. And I typically, like I said, I leave Instant 3D off for me because if you accidentally grab one of those handles without meaning to, you can mess up your model without intending to. So I like to not use Instant 3D, but I wanted to let you know what that is. So as another useful tool, remember we have these evaluation command bar up here as well. So I'm going to do some measuring, and there's my measurement window. You can see as I move around, it gives me different things that it highlights to see. So if I click on the perimeter of the cylinder, and again it's telling me in millimeters, so I'm going to change to inches. Later on in the class we'll talk about how to set up a default so that always comes up the way you want it. So it's telling me, you can see it shows me both out here in the graphics window, a diameter of 2.5 inches, and back here in the measurement window it also shows me diameter of 2.5 inches. It also shows me the length. So that's basically the circumference here, right? So that's basically pi times the diameter. So 3.14 times 2.5 gives me that. So that told me the diameter of the cylinder. If I want to know the height of the cylinder, I can click one face and then Control or Shift to click another. So now I have two faces selected, face 1 and face 2, and it's telling me the area of those two faces. That's useful. It tells me the perimeter of that particular one, and it tells me the distance from one face to the other, so 3 inches. So remember, this measurement tool is always available to you, and it's super useful. Okay. So let's go and change we were at 3 inches and 2.5 inches. Let's say instead I want it to be 1.5 inch diameter cylinder by 4.5 inches long. So I would edit my sketch to do the 1.5 inch part. So I'll say 1.5 and let that update, and then edit the feature to 4.5. Say OK. And I've now made those changes to my cylinder. So you hopefully now feel kind of comfortable with the extrude tool for very basic shapes. It's the most common feature you will create, especially when you're starting, is the feature boss extrude. Boss or base. Boss just means to add something onto it, or base means if you're creating the first part. We'll talk later about, you'll see there's another type of extrude, an extruded cut, where instead of adding material from a 2D shape, you're going to remove material from a 2D shape. But this is our first introduction to going from a 2D sketch to a 3D feature. As a reminder, let me delete this feature. And it pops up a window saying, okay, you want to delete that? And when I did that, it didn't delete the sketch. I had the option to delete the sketch. I chose not to. So I can go back in and edit that sketch again. While we were in the sketch is how we started our feature, right? We were still in the sketch. We went to feature and said extrude boss base. I can also do it from outside the sketch. So I could have multiple sketches that I've created, and then I want to just select one and do Extruded Boss Base. That's the same way. I don't have to be inside the sketch to do it. So very basic introduction to the Extrude tool. Now we have our very basic cylinder, our first extrusion. What if we want to either add material to it, subtract material from it? If you think back to the assembly and example part I showed you previously, it had lots of features over here in our feature manager, right? We've only got one so far. How do we move on to our next step? Well, again, that's probably going to involve creating new sketches. And we can do that, again, multiple ways. If I want to, let's say I want to put a hole right through this cylinder, I want to take it from being a solid cylinder and turn it into, say, more like a pipe shape. I'm going to sketch and remove material. And the further you get into SolidWorks, the more options you'll think about how you could do that. Let's look at two different ways I could do that. I could right now go back and edit the sketch. So right now it's a closed circle, but I could have made it, say, like a donut shape. I could have done a circle within a circle. Just add another circle there and dimension it. Say outer circle is 1.5 inches. Let's say this inner circle is 1 inch. And I can repeat my extrusion, and you can see now it made a ring. That's one way. So instead of extruding a cylinder and then cutting out the middle, I could have done it that way with this sketch. But let's not do that. Let's go back, remove that inner circle that created that. Let's say, you know, I thought I was just going to create a solid circle, and I'm changing that, saying I don't want to do that after all. And then later on I just said, yeah, I need to put a circle in it. Maybe I don't want to make a pipe that's symmetrical like that, but I want to add a mounting hole up on the top of it. So I'm going to sketch on this face. Actually, I could do it a couple different ways. I could go back and sketch on the front plane again. If we look at it, you can see that the front plane is here at the back, right? Because our original sketch, if we click on that and click show that sketch, it'll show up in gray. You can see that gray sketch is located on the front plane. So I could just go back to front plane and click on it and create a new sketch. So let's go ahead and do that as one option. And I can start drawing on that plane just like I did before. Right? Let's draw a line out here. While I'm in the sketch, all my lines are blue, right? Let's notice one thing that sometimes students do is they're working on a sketch, like right now, let's say I've got these 3 lines in here that are random, and they accidentally leave the sketch. They do that, either they accidentally click exit sketch up here, or let's go back in the sketch, or they hit this button up here thinking they're saying okay to a prompt. And what happens if you leave a sketch, the sketch shows up as gray now. Now I'm not active in the sketch anymore. I can still see the sketch. This is sketch 5 over here. If I select it in the feature manager, you can see that it highlights the components of it. But in general, that sketch is grayed out. And so if I wanted to try to move this line, I can't do that right now because I'm not in the sketch, right? I can select it, and let's say I want to delete it. If I click on delete, it's saying, did you want to delete the whole sketch? You know, I can't work on the line individually because I'm not inside this sketch. So let's say, yeah, let's get rid of that sketch. Because what I want to show you is I could sketch on the front plane like we just talked about. I could highlight that front plane and click sketch, or now that I have some faces, so a face is, right, a flat planar face, I can click on any face here, and when I do that, you'll see it pops up another context sensitive box saying all kinds of different options. And here's an important thing to distinguish. There are 2 icons that look relatively like sketches. One says edit sketch and one says sketch. And hopefully it kind of makes sense to you, the difference there. One, if I click on edit sketch, it opens the sketch that created that shape. So that's great. Whereas the other one, the one with the little asterisk, creates a new sketch on that face. So that's what I wanted to do here. So then I can select the sketch and click normal to, just to quickly get to where I'm looking right at my sketch. And let's try adding that circle that we talked about before, and I'll dimension it as being 1 inch. So I did a shortcut there that I should have talked about. So you can assign shortcut keys, and when I look up here at Smart Dimension, when I float over it, you'll see it says Smart Dimension and then it shows D next to it. So if I hit the key D right now, it automatically, oops, I hit C there accidentally. When I hit D, it automatically turned on the Smart Dimension tool. That's one shortcut. Another shortcut that does a similar thing, if I click on the right mouse key, hold it down, and drag my mouse, you'll see it gives me some shortcuts. So if I drag to the right, it gives a circle. If I drag down, it gives a rectangle. If I drag left, it gives me a line. And if I drag up, it gives me a dimension tool. So that's a quick way to get to 4 of the most common tools we use, is by holding down your right mouse key and picking which one of you want. So right now I want a dimension, so I scrolled up, I get a dimension, say 1 inch, and now I have a sketch. So is that sketch fully defined? How would I know? Well, if you think back, there's a couple ways I can tell. Is everything black? Yeah, it is. The other way, I can look down here and it shows fully defined. So I am in a sketch right now, but the sketch is fully defined. So I can come up here, and I talked about previously the extruded cut. It's just like an extruded boss base, but instead of adding material, it's subtracting material. So if I say extrude cut, it brings up property manager instead of feature manager. And just like before, I have options. Do I want to do it a blind cut based on a depth? So it just came up with the depth of the feature and assumes that's how far I want to cut. I can do that. Let's say I don't want to go all the way through. What if I only want to go halfway through the part? I can change this to 0.5 inches, and you can see, if I look in there, it's previewing, okay, I'm only going to cut ½ inch. So let's just say okay. And there I've done it. I've created an extruded cut that's part of my extruded base. So you can see now in my feature manager, I have 2 features. The original one that I can roll back to, that's the cylinder, and then I added a cut to it that created this pocket in it. Just as a reminder here, you can see there's that gray line on the back of it, and that's because I went in to the sketch for this first one and I told it to show me the sketch. So look at the difference in the feature manager over here between sketch 3 and sketch 6. You can see sketch 6 shows us a light black line. Sketch 3 shows us a darker blue line with a grid. And that's because sketch 3 is showing right now. So if I click on hide, then it starts to look like sketch 6. And by default, all sketches are hidden once you use them as part of a feature. Okay, so we've created our most basic shape, our cylinder. We added a cut into it to turn it into a pocket. Let's say, let me come up and let's say I want to add some mounting holes on the back of it. So I'm going to look at it perpendicular. I'm going to click on it and say I want a new sketch on it. And I want to put a hole, let's say I want to put a pattern of holes. I say I want them to be 1/4 inch in diameter. So I'll get my dimension tool, say 0.25. But now let's say I have to place them somewhere on here, and I want it to be, let's say I want it to be direct. I want one mounting hole directly above the origin, and then I want one directly off to the side. How can I guarantee that those are directly above or directly off to the side of them? That gets into tools we call relations. We talked about them briefly before. You can see over here, this center point of my circle has no relations. There's lots of different types of relations. There's a vertical, there's a horizontal, here is a coincident. This, if I grab the outside edge and look at another shape, I can do tangent, all different kinds of relations. So that is going to be the topic of our next video. Thank you for watching this one. I hope it was useful. Let's move on to sketch relations.